Okay, there were many inventions during this time that had a profound impact upon society. You can look here, right? Telephone, phonograph recordings, although today everybody streams, right? But that's when the phonograph was invented, the radio, as well as motion picture. Now, it's important to remember that during this time, if we look at those different inventions, a lot of them deal with communication, the spreading of information. So America is a very big country that when we make improvements with communication and sharing of information, it tends to make America smaller. Another result of this is a mass culture. And we have this mass culture even with us today, right? And what we mean by mass culture, America becomes less regional and more homogenous. It becomes a lot more alike. Also, because of radios and motion pictures, people aren't reading like they did before in realism. If you'll remember in realism, how because of the serialization and the importance of reading, that fiction became a dominant genre. That is going to change. And because of this mass culture, many authors view America as being kind of dumbed down. So they're going to criticize the society as a whole and try to differentiate themselves from the populace. And it's during this time we encounter what today we call the lost generation. This was a group of people, including many leading writers, who became expatriates or expats, and they went to move and live in Europe. And the hub for the lost generations was in Paris, France. And the reason for this, not only were they really upset with the path that America was taking regarding intellectuals, but also Europe after World War One, that their economy was in the toilet, whereas America after World War One was untouched. So they were able to go and live in Europe. It was cheaper to live in Europe during this time than it was to live in America. Okay, now we add in the third cog, which is World War One, and modernism is born. So World War One marks the start of modernism because that's the end of these old-fashioned ideas of heroism and chivalry. Before in war, right, it was regarded as a higher calling, or to die and serve your country in battle is a moral good thing, but not in World War One. Also, all of these advancements in technology you can see from the visuals here with tanks and machine guns. And you'll see from that top visual, if you look in the background as well as in the middle right, you can see horses. Yeah, so we still have some holdouts therein, right? Horses are still pulling things into battle and still being involved in battle, even though we have all these terrible death machines, as technology is being used to kill and not serve mankind. World War One resulted in more than 10 million casualties worldwide. It was the first worldwide war, and it's really symbolized a great civilization destroying itself. Incredible social change happened because of World War One. Women, and by the millions, went and entered the workforce. After World War One, the European powers lost their colonies, and many people viewed that they really didn't matter, that they viewed their lives as a sense of, just powerless, individual powerlessness. That's something that we'll see as we move into the different works of modernism. So we start a new century right? But shortly thereafter, we have a world war, and it's really a dark cloud that covers over the new century. And then, bang, we hit the Spanish flu. It was a coronavirus pandemic, just like COVID, almost exactly 100 years before the COVID pandemic. We had the Spanish flu pandemic, which is, yeah, there's scientists are still talking and writing and trying to research why this 100-year thing happens. So with the Spanish flu, what happened is after World War One ended, we had all these soldiers, traveling around the world, going back home, nurses, support staff, all of this. So the Spanish flu spread just all around the globe from 1918 to 1919. And look at the number of deaths, 40 to 50 million people. That's more than died in World War One, as well as the Black Death that happened in the Middle Ages. So you can imagine World War One, right? 10 million people dying. Then the Spanish flu, 40 to 50 million people dying. So people felt abandoned by God, and they just had an incredible loss of hope and optimism, which is perfectly understandable when you're surrounded by so much death. So, how did this influence the arts? Literature turns pessimistic. It's going to get, yeah, I know, it's going to get really gloomy and really dark. And a lot of folks will say, hey, Mr. K, didn't we see that with naturalism? Well, naturalism, remember, was part of realism. It was a realistic depiction of character versus the environment. It was truthful. The works as we move into modernism are going to be really dark and really gloomy. So just to let you know, yeah, it might get a little depressing. As well as stoic. A lot of folks have heard pessimistic and pessimism, but maybe not stoicism or stoic. That's when you're indifferent not only to joy and pleasure, but also pain and grief, right? So in other words, you're just not affected. You're unaffected by good things as well as bad. And also because of all those different cogs in the machine that we saw, right? World War One, advancements in science and technology, as well as those influential thinkers, the modern world becomes broken. It becomes a puzzle. It is fragmented. So this is something that we'll see over and over again in modernism. Before, when we were with realism, right, there were guiding principles. There was a dominant genre. Writers were working towards verisimilitude. Everybody was working towards things, and had a goal in mind. However, with fragmentation, there's no guiding principle. And since there's no guiding principle, the lack of a guiding principle becomes the guiding principle. And that gives us fragmentation. So we can look here and we can see that modernism rejects values of progress, social responsibility, morality. Modernism, we can look to see the individual being isolated and alienated, even though the individual is surrounded in a society. The individual just feels alone. Also, modernism is going to reject the objectivity of realism. The truth now is going to be an interaction between the author, the reader, and then the reality of the text. So you can imagine with each new reader, right, that gives a different reading. So we have different truths, and each becomes valid. Yeah, no, so we're getting close to that 10-minute mark. So we'll pick up and kind of shift back to history in the next lecture.